Hey,
want to hear you sing.
you,
Go on.
the janitor in the back.
This
Come
is
up
the
here
moment,
and sing.
This is the day.
Let's see what kind of voice a mop pays for.
Break away.
That was lovely, but I know
The
you have
sentence
something more
landed
powerful
lightly,
inside you. Go ahead.
almost playfully,
Sound of the music
but it cut
lifts
like
me
glass.
higher every day.
For half a second, the historic Chicago theater did not react. Then every head turned at once. Velvet seats whispered as bodies shifted. Crystal chandeliers trembled faintly above. On the massive LED screen behind, Elara Voss. The words, "Crown of Mercy Charity Gala," continued to glow. Golden, elegant, immaculate. A night branded as compassion. A night sold as hope. At the far edge of the hall, near the service door that never made it into photographs, Jonah Reed stopped breathing. He was still wearing his yellow rubber gloves. That was the cruelest part. Not the laughter beginning to ripple through the audience, not the cameras swinging toward him. Not even the fact that millions were now watching online. It was the gloves. Bright, cheap, impossible to ignore. Jonah had finished wiping the edge of the stage exactly 10 minutes earlier. He had timed it carefully, as he always did. Do the work. Leave no trace. Disappear before anyone notices you were there at all. Elara Voss had just erased that plan with one sentence. The live stream camera zoomed in, merciless and precise. Jonah saw himself reflected on the giant screen through the raised phone of a guest in the third row, a tall, narrow-shouldered man in a faded blue janitor's uniform, a cleaning cloth slung over his shoulder like a surrender flag. I'm sorry, ma'am, Jonah said, instinctively. His voice came out dry, not shaky, dry like paper that had waited too long. Don't apologize, Elara replied smoothly. Apologies are for people with leverage. A few laughs slipped out, uncertain at first, then bolder. Elara stepped down from the center of the stage, heels clicking with deliberate rhythm, and walked toward the wings like a queen inspecting her servants. Each step echoed. Each echo counted something down. Jonah tried to step back. He didn't make it. Elara stopped directly in front of him and placed a hand, cool, ringed, deliberate, on his shoulder. It wasn't forceful. It didn't need to be. Power rarely raises its voice. Come on, she said sweetly. Let everyone see whether you actually belong anywhere near music, or if you're just cleaning up after people who do. She turned and walked back toward the stage, her hand still guiding him forward, not dragging him but not releasing him either. Jonah followed because the lights had already swallowed him. Heat rushed into his face as the spotlight snapped on. The audience blurred for a moment, then sharpened into rows of expensive smiles. Somewhere out there, people were raising glasses. Somewhere else, people were typing comments faster than thought. Sing, janitor. This is going to be good. Who does he think he is? Jonah tightened his grip on the microphone Elara had pressed into his hand. Jonah Reed, she announced, turning slightly so the camera caught her best angle. Some of you might remember him. That made Jonah's chest tighten. Years ago, he was a promising contestant on a certain music competition, Elara continued. A real talent, a real opportunity. She paused, just long enough. And then, she said lightly, he disappeared. The word disappeared drifted through the hall, neat and complete, like a verdict. No context, no explanation. Just absence turned into accusation. Jonah scanned the crowd without meaning to. Faces, screens, reflections. Then, for a split second, he imagined a small hospital room, pale walls, beeping machines, and a little girl holding a phone with both hands. Eva. 6 years old, born early, a heart that worked harder than it should have. Jonah carried the deadline with him everywhere, 2 weeks, written nowhere and everywhere at once. It lived in his wallet as insurance statements. It lived in his sleep as numbers he couldn't pay. Elara snapped her fingers toward the band. "Crown of Mercy," she said. "The original key." A murmur spread instantly. Even people who didn't know music knew that song. The note at the end had been mythologized. Fans spoke about it the way climbers spoke about peaks no one returned from. Jonah swallowed. "You know it, right?" Elara asked, tilting her head. "Of course you do. You used to dream about songs like this." Dream. Jonah looked at the microphone. It felt heavier than it should have, like it was remembering things for him. He remembered stage lights that didn't burn, applause that didn't hurt, and a woman in a hospital bed smiling through oxygen tubes, telling him to go sing. "Go," she had whispered. You were born for it. He hadn't gone. Elara leaned closer, lowering her voice as if offering mercy. She forgot, or didn't care, that Jonah's microphone was still live. "Fail quietly," she whispered. "That's what you're good at." The words spread faster than sound should have been able to. They filled the hall. They entered millions of living rooms. They became permanent. Something shifted, not in the crowd, in Jonah. The band began the introduction, smooth, polished, beautiful enough to feel innocent. Jonah took a breath and felt his heart steady, not race, steady. He could walk away. He could step down, return the microphone, put his gloves back on, and go back to the hospital. No one would stop him. They would forget him by morning. But Elara would still be standing there, still selling perfection, still building a kingdom on something borrowed, still using charity as a spotlight. Jonah lifted his head. "Before I sing," he said. The words were calm. They surprised even him. Elara raised an eyebrow, amused, indulgent. "Yes?" Jonah turned slightly toward the sound booth, toward the people hidden behind glass who controlled what the audience believed they were hearing. "Please," he said evenly, "turn off the backing track." Silence fell hard enough to feel physical. Elara's smile did not vanish, but it stopped reaching her eyes. "The backing track is part of the arrangement," she replied. Jonah nodded once, slowly. "Then," he said, "you sing first." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. Someone laughed, too loudly. Someone else stopped recording and started again. Elara stared at him. For the first time since she had pointed him out, her expression was no longer playful. It was alert, measuring, as if she had just realized the floor beneath her might not be solid. Jonah stood under the lights, still wearing yellow gloves, still holding a mop-marked microphone. But he was no longer a prop. He was a father who had already chosen once between a dream and a life, and knew exactly what choice he would make again. Elara turned abruptly toward the sound booth. "Fine," she said, her voice sharp now. "Turn it all off." The technician hesitated. Fingers hovered over the console. Jonah saw the hesitation. He understood it. Because truth does not arrive gently. It arrives and asks who is willing to be crushed first. In the crowd, a phone vibrated. A message appeared on a cracked screen. "Daddy, are you okay?" Jonah closed his eyes for one brief moment. Then he opened them. Because some stories don't begin with music. They begin with a decision to stop pretending. And 4 hours earlier, in a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and dust, that decision had already been made. 4 hours earlier, the theater did not look like a palace. Without the audience, without the lights, without the chandeliers turned fully on, it was just an old building made of dust, history, and echoes that never quite left. The backstage hallway smelled of disinfectant and stale wood. The air was always colder there, as if the walls remembered winters better than summers. Jonah Reed pushed his cleaning cart slowly down the corridor, one wheel squeaking in protest. He hated that sound, not because it was loud, nothing about it was, but because noise meant attention. Attention meant questions, and questions had a way of turning a man into a story he did not want to tell. Jonah stopped, crouched, and adjusted the wheel with practiced hands. The squeak faded. Silence returned. Good. On the wall above him, an old analog clock ticked steadily. 3:12 p.m. In 4 hours, the gala would begin. Jonah rose, rolled his shoulders once, and continued toward the main stage. He moved the way invisible people learn to move, efficient, unobtrusive, never in the way. He wiped fingerprints from brass railings that would be touched again within minutes. He swept dust that would return by morning. He erased himself so that others could shine. That was the job. And it paid $18.50 an hour before taxes. Jonah didn't complain. Complaining required imagining alternatives. He had learned not to do that. He parked the cart near the stage edge and glanced down at his phone, not because it buzzed, but because he needed to see something familiar. A photo of Eva filled the screen. 6 years old, too thin for her age, hair pulled back with a pink clip that never stayed in place. Her smile was uneven, cautious, as if she was always saving energy for later. Jonah tapped the photo gently, the way one might knock on a door they hoped would open. A message notification appeared. Eva, voice message. Jonah pressed play. "Daddy," her small voice whispered. "Are you working tonight?" "Yes, sweetheart," he murmured back instinctively, even though she couldn't hear him yet. "I know," Eva continued. "Nurse Paula said you're cleaning the big theater again. Is that where the shiny singer is?" Jonah closed his eyes for a moment. "Yes," he said quietly. There was a pause, then Eva spoke again, softer this time. "Daddy, can you sing later? Just a little, not loud. My heart likes it when you sing." Jonah swallowed. "I will," he said, voice steady. "I promise." He slid the phone back into his pocket and picked up his mop. Jonah had not sung on a stage in 5 years, but he sang every night. He sang in hospital rooms, barely above a whisper, careful not to wake other children. He sang in their small apartment kitchen while boiling water for instant noodles. He sang with his head bowed, like a confession meant for only one listener. Music had become something private, something fragile, something he refused to let the world touch. As Jonah wiped down the piano bench near center stage, voices echoed from the far end of the hall. The band was arriving early for sound check. Laughter bounced lightly off the walls. Someone tuned a guitar, the note lingering longer than it should have. Jonah worked faster. He knew better than to linger when musicians arrived. They tended to look through him, and on bad days, at him. He preferred neither. But as he reached the glass panels near the wings, a familiar voice cut through the hum of preparation. "Let's take it from the bridge." Jonah froze. Not because the voice was loud, but because it was unmistakable. Ilara Voss. She stood on stage in rehearsal clothes, simple, fitted, intentionally casual. Without the sequins and makeup, she looked smaller, almost ordinary. The band watched her carefully, waiting. Jonah remained still, cloth in hand, half hidden behind the curtains. The piano played the opening progression of Crown of Mercy. It was a beautiful song. Jonah had never denied that. The verses sat comfortably in a range that made audiences feel safe. Ilara's voice filled the space, controlled, trained, flawless in the way something practiced could be flawless. Then the song climbed. Jonah felt it before he consciously registered it. The tension, the subtle tightening of Ilara's neck, the slight lift of her shoulders. Signs most people missed. Signs Jonah could not. The melody rose toward the bridge, the place where the song stopped being pretty and started becoming legend. Ilara reached for the high passage. Her voice cracked, not dramatically, not enough for the untrained ear to notice, but it faltered, just below the note it was supposed to land on. She stopped, cleared her throat. "Sorry," she said lightly. "Dry air." The band nodded. Someone adjusted a stand. Jonah's hands tightened around the cloth. They tried again. This time, just before the climb, Ilara turned slightly toward the sound booth. "Bring the support up," she said, low enough that it sounded like a suggestion. "Just a touch." A technician hesitated, then nodded. The music resumed. When the final note came, it rang out. Pure, perfect, impossible. The room reacted. Even empty, even rehearsing, the sound had power. Jonah did not move, because he knew that sound. He knew the faint, metallic edge layered into it. He knew how the note sat above the harmony instead of inside it. He knew the difference between breath and recording, between risk and certainty. That note did not come from Ilara Voss. It came from the speakers. Jonah stepped back slowly, as if afraid the sound itself might see him. 5 years ago, he had been told he didn't respect opportunity. 5 years ago, he had walked away from a stage and into a hospital hallway that smelled exactly like this one. He had chosen life over applause. And now, standing in the shadows with a mop in his hand, he understood something with terrifying clarity. Ilara Voss had chosen the opposite. Jonah pushed his cart back toward the custodial room. His chest felt tight, not with anger, but with something heavier. Resolve. Inside the small, windowless room, Jonah set the mop aside and sat on the narrow bench. He pulled folded papers from his jacket pocket. Hospital estimates, insurance breakdowns, highlighted numbers, $87,400. Coverage, 40%. Balance due, $52,440. Deadline, 14 days. Jonah closed his eyes. He could not afford heroism. He could not afford pride. And yet, somewhere between the cracked note and the perfect lie that followed it, something inside him had crossed a line. Jonah took out his phone again, not to call anyone. He searched. Ilara Voss Charity. Annual reports. Independent audits. It took him less than 10 minutes. A small article from last year, buried deep in local news. 15% of funds reached medical programs. The rest labeled administrative expenses. Jonah stared at the number. 15%. He thought of Eva, of children like her, of parents who believed. A janitor sat alone in a custodial room and understood something the world was about to learn the hard way. This wasn't about music. It never had been. Jonah folded the papers carefully and placed them back into his pocket. He stood, straightened his uniform, and put his gloves back on. The gala would begin soon, and when it did, Ilara Voss would call him out in front of everyone. Jonah did not yet know how he would respond, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not be silent. Because 5 years ago, he had already chosen what mattered. And in the next chapter of his life, that choice was about to be tested again, under lights far brighter than before. And years earlier, when Jonah first walked away from the stage, the world had already decided who he was supposed to be. 5 years earlier, Jonah Reed stood under lights that did not burn. They warmed. The stage was smaller than the one in Chicago, but it felt endless, An ocean of darkness beyond the footlights, broken only by the soft glow of judges' desks and the red eye of cameras waiting to decide whether a man mattered. This was the final night of Starfall. Jonah could still remember the smell of the place. Hairspray, hot cables, nervous sweat. He wore a simple black jacket borrowed from wardrobe, the sleeves slightly too short. His hands rested loosely at his sides, steady in a way that surprised even him. He was 29. The youngest judge leaned forward, smiling. The producer backstage had whispered it an hour earlier, unable to contain himself. "You're the one. Don't rush it. Just sing." Jonah believed him. Not because of ego, because of math. Votes, trends, comments. The way people leaned in when Jonah sang, as if sound itself had weight. He had watched the numbers climb week after week with quiet disbelief. He did not picture trophies. He pictured stability, health insurance, a kitchen with a window, a life where love didn't feel like a risk. Backstage, Jonah loosened his shoulders and took a breath. He had chosen his song carefully, something restrained, something honest. He was not there to impress. He was there to last. Then his phone vibrated. Once. He ignored it. Then again. He frowned, stepped toward the wall where the signal was better, and glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Jonah hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" For a moment there was only noise, movement, voices overlapping. Then a woman spoke, calm in the way professionals learned to be when chaos waited just off screen. "Mr. Reed, this is St. Anne's Medical Center. Your wife, Lena, was admitted 15 minutes ago." Jonah's body went cold. "What?" he said. "She was fine this morning." "I'm sorry," the woman replied gently. "She collapsed at home. Acute respiratory failure. We're doing everything we can." Jonah pressed his back against the wall. "Is she—" "She's asking for you." The hallway narrowed. The sounds of the studio faded into a distant hum. Jonah slid down until he was sitting on the floor. Phone clutched in his hand. "How long?" he asked. "We don't know," the woman said. "But I would come now." Jonah closed his eyes. Beyond the door, the host's voice echoed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are moments away from crowning the winner." Someone knocked lightly on the wall near him. A production assistant crouched down. "Jonah," she whispered urgently. "You're on in 3. He looked up at her, eyes unfocused. "My wife," he said. "She's in the hospital." The assistant froze. I'll get someone," she stammered, already backing away. Jonah stood. His legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. He walked toward the stage entrance, then stopped. On the monitor, he saw the judge's table. And there she was, Ilara Voss. Even then, she was composed, luminous, unshakable. She noticed him on the screen and smiled faintly, an encouraging smile, practiced and generous. Jonah felt something inside him break, not loudly, not all at once, but cleanly, like a cord cut with precision. He turned away. No announcement, no explanation. He walked past the stunned assistant, past the security guard who reached out but didn't stop him, and out into the night. The hospital lights were harsh. Jonah ran down corridors that smelled of antiseptic and fear. He found Lena in the ICU, pale and small beneath white sheets, oxygen mask fogging faintly with each breath. She smiled when she saw him. "You didn't sing," she whispered. Jonah shook his head, tears blurring everything. "I can," he said desperately. "I can go back." Lena lifted her hand weakly and pressed it against his chest. "No," she said. "You're here. That's the song. She died 3 days later. Their daughter Eva was born early, tiny, fragile, already fighting. Jonah learned new words then, new numbers, new prayers. The world moved on. Starfall crowned a winner. Jonah Reed became a headline for one day. Promising contestant abandons finale. Unprofessional exit shocks producers. Then Ilara Voss appeared on a late-night interview. Elegant, controlled, calm. The host asked gently, "What did you think of Jonah Reed leaving the show?" Ilara's smile didn't falter. "Talent is meaningless without discipline," she said. "Anyone who doesn't respect opportunity doesn't deserve a dream." That sentence sealed doors Jonah never even saw. Calls stopped coming. Auditions were canceled. A manager he had trusted didn't return messages. Jonah learned quickly how silence worked in the industry. It didn't argue. It erased. 5 years later, he pushed a cleaning cart through a theater hallway. 5 years later, Ilara Voss rehearsed a note she could not sing. Jonah stood in the custodial room, memory settling like dust he could not wipe away. The past was not painful because it had ended. It was painful because it had been judged. Jonah folded the memory carefully and placed it where he kept all the things he could not afford to carry openly. Outside, the theater stirred. Sound checks continued. The gala drew closer. And Jonah Reed, once praised for his promise and discarded for his humanity, stepped back into the corridor, unaware that the same woman who had pronounced judgment over his life was about to test him again. This time, in public. And this time, the lie would not go unanswered, because some reckonings do not arrive when you are ready. They arrive when the truth has waited long enough. And on that afternoon, as Jonah listened from the shadows, he began to hear something else, something wrong in the music itself. Jonah Reed had learned long ago to trust his ears more than his eyes. Eyes could be fooled by lights, by posture, by confidence rehearsed until it looked like truth. But sound, once it passed the body, once it left the lungs and entered the air, carried its own fingerprints. Jonah had spent years listening to those fingerprints in small rooms, in quiet nights, in places where no one clapped. That afternoon he listened again. He stood just beyond the curtain line, half hidden by a stack of black road cases marked Orchestra Pit. Do not move, wiping the glass of a framed poster that no one would read tonight. The cloth moved in slow, circular strokes. His body performed the habit. His mind did not. On stage, Ilara Voss took a sip of water and nodded to the band. "From the top of the bridge," she said. The pianist played the lead-in. Clean, controlled. The room was empty of audience, but not of pressure. Even rehearsal air could carry it. Ilara sang. Her lower register filled the hall beautifully. Jonah had never denied that part. Her tone was polished, her diction precise. It was the voice of someone who had spent thousands of hours with coaches, mirrors, microphones. Then the melody climbed. Jonah felt it before he heard it, the subtle tightening, the shift in breath placement that preceded trouble. Ilara's neck stiffened. Her shoulders lifted a fraction. The sound thinned. She reached for the note. It didn't land. Not fully. Not cleanly. It was close enough that most people would have missed it, close enough to be forgiven. But Jonah heard the strain scrape against the pitch like metal on stone. The note collapsed a half step below where it should have lived. Ilara stopped. "Dry throat," she said lightly, as if announcing weather. She glanced toward the sound booth. "Can I get a little support there?" The request sounded casual, almost reasonable. Jonah's cloth paused mid-motion. The technician leaned forward, fingers moving across sliders. The band reset. This time, When the climb came, the sound changed. The final note bloomed. Perfect, glassy, unnaturally stable. It hovered above the harmony instead of sitting inside it. It shone with a brightness that didn't breathe. Jonah felt his stomach drop, because he knew that sound. He had studied it. Years ago, when he still believed in returning, he had spent nights listening to isolated stems, to raw tracks leaked online, to studio takes where the truth slipped through before being polished away. He knew the difference between a voice risking collapse and a recording immune to fear. That note was immune. That note did not belong to Ilara Voss. Jonah finished the glass and stepped back slowly, careful not to make noise. His heart did not race. It slowed, heavy and deliberate, as if bracing for impact. 5 years ago, he had been told he didn't respect opportunity. 5 years ago, he had walked away from a stage because someone he loved needed him more than applause did. Now, standing in the shadow of a woman who had chosen perfection over honesty, Jonah understood something he had never allowed himself to articulate before. She had built a career on a sound that was not hers. The rehearsal ended with polite nods and light applause from the crew. Ilara stepped down, satisfied. She did not look toward the shadows. Jonah turned and pushed his cart back toward the custodial room. Inside, the room was exactly what it had always been. A narrow bench, a dented locker, a sink with a slow leak. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. The smell of disinfectant clung to the walls like memory. Jonah sat. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded papers again. Hospital estimates, insurance statements, timelines. He stared at the numbers until they blurred, then folded them carefully and placed them back where they belonged. Next, he took out his phone. Not to call anyone. To search. He typed slowly, deliberately. Ilara Voss Foundation, Annual Report. Charity Audit. Independent Crown of Mercy. Gala Funds Distribution. Most results were glowing. Sponsored articles. Red carpet photos. Carefully worded praise. Then, buried 3 pages deep, he found it. A local investigative piece from the previous year. No sensational headline, no viral spread, just numbers. 15% of funds reached pediatric medical programs. 85% listed as administrative costs, marketing, brand development. Jonah read the article twice, then a third time. He thought of Eva, of the way her chest rose too quickly when she slept, of the way nurses smiled too brightly when explaining procedures. He thought of parents like him, who donated because they believed the story they were sold. A janitor sat alone in a windowless room and felt something harden, not into anger but into clarity. This was not about music. Music was only the surface. This was about power, who was allowed to take, who was expected to stay quiet, and who paid the price when lies were dressed as generosity. Jonah stood and washed his hands at the sink. The water ran cold. He dried them carefully and put his gloves back on. There were floors left to clean. There always were. As he pushed his cart back into the hallway, voices echoed again from the stage. The lighting crew tested spots. The band ran a final check. Somewhere, ushers practiced smiles. The gala would begin soon. And when it did, Ilara Voss would stand beneath the lights and speak about hope. Jonah did not yet know how the night would unfold. He did not know that she would call him out. He did not know that millions would be watching, but he knew this. If she sang that note tonight and called it hers, she would be lying. And if she dragged him into the light to humiliate him, she would not be doing it by accident. Jonah pushed the cart into place and stepped back, invisible once more, at least for now. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing a quiet man can do is hear the truth before anyone else does. And in the next moment, as the doors opened and the audience began to arrive, Jonah Reed felt the night begin to lean toward him, slowly, inevitably, toward the moment when the lie would finally demand a witness. The doors opened at 6. By 6:15, the theater was full. Perfume replaced disinfectant. Soft laughter replaced echoes. The chandeliers above the audience brightened gradually, like a promise being kept. Ushers guided guests to their seats with trained smiles. Programs rustled. Glasses clinked. From the wings, Jonah Reed watched the transformation. He stood where he always stood, half shadow, half purpose. His cart was parked neatly against the wall, tools arranged with quiet discipline. To anyone looking, he was simply part of the infrastructure. Necessary. Unnoticed. Until Alara Voss stepped onto the stage. Applause erupted instantly, rolling forward like a wave that had been waiting all evening to crash. Alara smiled and lifted a hand, letting the sound swell before accepting it. She wore a silver gown that caught the light with every movement, turning her into something reflective, untouchable. "Good evening," she said warmly. "Tonight is about mercy, about giving children a second chance." The audience leaned in. Cameras locked on. Jonah's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. He had heard this tone before. It was the tone people used when they needed to sound sincere without risking anything real. Alara spoke beautifully. She spoke about hope, about fragile hearts, about how music had saved her and how she wanted to give back. Behind her, the screen lit up with images of children in hospital beds. Jonah did not want to look, but he did. And there she was, Eva, the pink hair clip, the careful smile, the photograph Jonah had reluctantly signed permission for, believing the cause mattered more than privacy. His chest tightened so sharply he had to grip the edge of the wall. "Every ticket tonight," Alara continued, "goes directly toward helping these children fight." The applause came fast and generous. Jonah felt the lie settle into the room like a held breath. Alara moved through 2 songs with ease. Her voice was strong, controlled, familiar. The audience relaxed into admiration. Phones came out, not to record scandal, but to preserve perfection. Then she smiled again. "And now," she said, "the song many of you are waiting for." A murmur spread. "Crown of Mercy." The band began the introduction. Jonah felt the floor tilt. This was it. Alara sang the opening verses flawlessly. Her voice carried confidence, certainty. She looked exactly like the woman people believed her to be. As the song approached the bridge, Jonah felt something shift behind him. Movement. Attention. Alara turned slightly, scanning the wings. Then she saw him. Her smile sharpened. "And before we reach the heart of this song," she said casually, "I noticed something." The camera followed her gaze. "So many people here tonight are here to serve," Alara continued, "and sometimes we forget to celebrate them." A polite ripple of applause followed. Jonah's stomach dropped. "There's a man backstage," she said, pointing. "One of our janitors. Jonah, is it?" The spotlight snapped toward the wings. Light flooded Jonah's vision before he could react. The audience turned as one body. The screen magnified him instantly. His uniform, his gloves, the cloth on his shoulder. Laughter broke out. Not cruel enough to protest, not kind enough to stop. Jonah took one step back. "Come on," Alara said brightly. "Don't be shy." Jonah felt something cold move through him, not fear, but the knowledge of being cornered. If he refused now, the story would still be written for him. He stepped forward. Each step onto the stage felt heavier than the last. The applause faltered, then returned, uncertain and curious. Jonah stood under the lights, blinking, waiting for his eyes to adjust. Ilara handed him a microphone. "Some of you might remember Jonah," she said. "He was once a promising singer himself." A pause. Until he walked away. Jonah's mouth opened. "My wife." Ilara raised a hand, gently silencing him. "Tonight isn't about excuses," she said softly. "Tonight is about giving." A few chuckles followed. "And what better way to give," she continued, "than letting Jonah share his voice with us?" The band stopped playing. Silence spread. Jonah looked at the microphone in his hand. He thought of Eva watching from a hospital bed, believing this night meant something. He did not want this. He wanted to leave. But leaving would not erase the lie. Leaving would only confirm it. Jonah lifted his head. "Before I sing," he said calmly. Ilara turned toward him, amused. "Yes?" Jonah glanced toward the sound booth. "Could you turn off the backing track?" The room stilled. Ilara laughed lightly. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "This is a performance." Jonah met her gaze. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking." A murmur began to spread. Phones rose higher. Ilara's smile tightened. "You don't get to make demands here," she said quietly. Jonah nodded once. "Then sing first," he replied. "Just you." The audience gasped. Someone laughed in disbelief. Someone else whispered, "Did he just—" Ilara stared at him. For a moment, the entire machine hesitated. Then Ilara turned sharply toward the band. "Fine," she said. "Turn it off." The technician hesitated. "Do it," she snapped. The music resumed, bare, exposed. Ilara began to sing again. Her voice filled the hall, strong at first. The audience relaxed, reassured. Then the bridge came. The melody climbed. Jonah did not move. Ilara reached for the note, and missed. The sound cracked, audible, undeniable. A collective intake of breath swept through the audience. Ilara stopped, laughed awkwardly, and took a sip of water. "Dry throat," she said again. Jonah spoke quietly, but the microphone carried it. "You can't sing it." The laughter stopped. Ilara turned on him, eyes flashing. "My voice is tired," she snapped. "But the recording isn't," Jonah replied. The room erupted into whispers. Ilara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're making a mistake." Jonah looked at her, not with anger, not with triumph, with certainty. "I'm telling the truth," he said. Before Ilara could respond, a voice rang out from the wings. "He's right." Every head turned. The sound engineer stepped forward, pale but steady. "I've played that track for years," he said. "She's never sung that note live." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Ilara froze. Jonah stood very still. This was no longer humiliation. This was exposure. And the room had not yet realized how much was about to come apart. Because once a lie is spoken aloud, it demands proof. And in the next moment, the entire world would hear whether the truth could sing. And that truth was about to be tested, note by impossible note. Silence did not arrive gently. It fell, heavy, final, absolute. 500 people sat motionless in their seats. 2 million more stared through screens that no longer felt safe. The chandeliers above the audience seemed to dim, not because the lights had changed, but because something else had taken their place. Truth had weight. Ilara Voss stood at the center of the stage, microphone raised, shoulders squared. The band waited, hands hovering over instruments, eyes fixed on her back. No one spoke. No one dared to fill the space she had created. She inhaled. The opening lines of Crown of Mercy came out strong, rich, practiced, familiar. The audience leaned in again, relieved to recognize what they expected. Some nodded, reassured. Some smiled, eager to forget the crack they had just heard. For a moment, it seemed possible. Ilara moved through the verse with confidence, each note placed carefully, each breath controlled. This was the version of her people had paid to see. This was the version she knew how to be. Then the melody began to rise. Jonah Reed stood a few steps behind her, just outside the brightest circle of light. He did not watch her face. He listened. He heard the shift before anyone else did. The breath climbed higher in her chest. The support thinned. The sound began to lose its center, not enough to alarm the untrained ear, but enough to betray fear. E5, F5, G5. Ilara's neck tightened. A muscle jumped visibly beneath her skin. Her shoulders lifted a fraction of an inch, an unconscious attempt to reach with the body what the voice could not carry alone. The audience sensed it now. A low tension moved through the room like a current. Ilara reached for the crown. The note fractured. Not violently, quietly. The sound broke apart just below the target, splintering into air before collapsing completely. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Ilara stopped singing. She laughed, too quickly. "Sorry," she said, clearing her throat. "Dry air. Happens to everyone." She reached for the water placed discreetly at the edge of the stage and took a careful sip. Her hand shook despite her effort to keep it steady. Jonah did not move. Phones were already raised. Whispers spread like a living thing. She missed it. That didn't sound right. Was that the note? Ilara lifted the microphone again. "This is exactly why artists use support during long performances," she said, her voice tightening as she spoke faster. "Protecting the voice is—" "You've never sung it," Jonah said. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Ilara turned sharply, eyes flashing. "I said my voice is tired." Jonah met her gaze. "But your album isn't," he replied calmly. "And neither are your live recordings." A wave of murmurs surged through the hall. People leaned toward one another, questions forming faster than answers. Jonah continued, his voice steady, measured. "I've listened to every performance of this song, every televised show, every tour clip posted online. The note you claim is live has the same harmonic signature every time." Ilara's jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I do," Jonah said quietly. "Because I hear frequencies." He turned slightly, addressing the room without raising his voice. "The note on your recordings sits at 1,174 hertz. Tonight, what you just sang peaked below 1,100. That wasn't the crown. That was a step beneath it." A voice called out from the audience. "Is that true?" Ilara's face flushed, then paled. "This is absurd," she snapped. "I have perfect pitch." Jonah nodded once. "So do I." The words landed differently this time. A man in the front row stood halfway out of his seat. A journalist's fingers flew across a keyboard. The cameras abandoned polite framing and began hunting reactions. Jonah did not look at any of it. "There's another voice on your album," he said. "It's listed as additional vocals, but it's not background. It's the crown note, and it doesn't belong to you." The room erupted. "Ilara, what is he saying? Is that possible?" Ilara stepped toward Jonah, her voice low and sharp. "You need to stop." "Why?" Jonah asked. For the first time since stepping onto the stage, he felt something shift inside him, not fear, not anger, freedom. "Because I'm telling the truth." Ilara reached for his arm, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to control. Before she could pull him back, a voice cut through the chaos. "He's right." The sound came from the wings. The entire auditorium turned. The sound engineer stepped forward slowly, hands shaking but eyes clear. He swallowed once before speaking. "My name is Mark Ellison," he said. "I've been Ilara's lead sound engineer for 5 years." Ilara stared at him, disbelief giving way to rage. "At every major performance," Mark continued, "I played a pre-recorded stem for that note. She has never sung it live, not once." The silence that followed was different from before. This one hurt. Ilara whispered, "You're fired." "I know," Mark replied, "but he's a single father, and he's been braver than I've been." The words echoed. The band stepped back from their instruments. No one looked at Ilara now. She stood alone at the center of the stage, surrounded by proof she could no longer outrun. Jonah felt the weight of the room settle. This was the moment. Not the singing, not the exposure. The point where everyone had to decide whether truth mattered more than comfort. Ilara lifted her chin, eyes burning. "You think this proves anything?" she snapped. "Then sing." She turned toward Jonah fully. "No warm-up, no preparation. Right now." Jonah's hands trembled. Not because he was afraid to sing, but because he understood what was being asked. This was not a performance. This was a verdict. From the far side of the hall, a steady voice called out, "Sing the way you sing for your daughter!" Jonah turned. An older janitor stood, mop still in hand, eyes calm. Jonah closed his eyes. He took one breath. Not to impress. Not to win. But to tell the truth the only way he knew how. And as the band waited, as the world leaned forward, Jonah Reed stepped into the light, ready to let his voice decide what power never could. Jonah Reed did not rush. That surprised people more than anything else. The band waited, uncertain. The audience leaned forward, breath caught between curiosity and disbelief. Cameras adjusted their focus, searching for drama in his face. They found none. Jonah stood under the lights with his eyes closed, one hand resting lightly against the microphone, the other hanging loose at his side. He did not stretch his neck. He did not roll his shoulders. He did not prepare the way performers usually did when they meant to conquer something. He breathed, low, slow, deep enough to feel his ribs widen, his back open, his feet root into the stage. Somewhere far away, he imagined a hospital room, pale walls, the rhythmic beeping of machines. A small hand curled around his finger. "Sing softly," Eva always said. "Don't scare my heart." Jonah opened his eyes. "Play it," he said quietly. The band began. Not the polished, layered version the audience knew, but a stripped arrangement, bare and honest. Piano first, then strings, restrained, leaving space where ego used to live. Jonah sang the opening line gently. The sound surprised people. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce itself as anything special. It was warm. His voice settled into the lower register with ease, like someone returning home after a long absence. Each word carried weight not because of volume, but because of intention. He sang as if the lyrics were letters he had written and never mailed. A few audience members exchanged glances. "He's good," someone whispered. Jonah moved into the pre-chorus, and something shifted. The sound opened, not forced, not pushed, just allowed. His breath carried the phrase forward, lifting it without strain. He was not performing. He was remembering. Years of silence sat behind the notes, giving them gravity. Years of choosing hospital hallways over spotlights. Years of singing to one person in rooms no one filmed. The melody climbed. D5, E5. F5. Jonah followed it effortlessly, his voice lightening as it rose, like a hand releasing a stone it no longer needed to grip. Elara Voss stood frozen a few feet away. Her face was no longer angry. It was terrified. The bridge arrived, the place where legend had been built, where Elara had failed. Jonah did not hesitate. He shifted registers seamlessly, the transition so smooth it felt invisible. There was no audible break, no tightening, no reach, just a gentle handoff from chest to head, like water flowing into air. G5, A5, B5. The audience sat up straight. Someone in the front row covered their mouth. Jonah reached the crown. The note bloomed, clear, clean, alive. It rang through the theater not as a scream, not as a trick, but as a bell, pure and undeniable. He held it steady, letting it exist without fear, without apology. 4 seconds. Then, without strain, he went higher. Not because he needed to prove anything, because the music asked him to. D6, E6. The sound expanded, filling the space where lies had lived. There was no backing track to catch him, no safety net. Just breath, bone, and truth. Then Jonah brought the voice down gently, descending the scale with care, returning to the melody as if setting something precious back where it belonged. The final chorus came. His voice was fully open now, not louder, freer, the kind of freedom that came from nothing left to protect. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was not shock. It was reverence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the theater exploded. People leapt to their feet. Applause roared upward, raw and unfiltered. Shouts broke through, some joyful, some stunned. Tears streaked faces that had arrived expecting entertainment and found themselves witnessing truth. The band stood, instruments forgotten, clapping hard enough to hurt. Jonah stood still, breathing hard, not from effort, but from release. His hands trembled slightly now, the delayed reaction of a body that had held too much for too long. Elara looked small. A woman in the front row rose slowly. Her hair was silver, her posture unassailable. "I've been in this industry for 40 years, she said, voice breaking through the applause. And that was real. Another man stood, a producer known for shaping stars. "I need to say this," he added. "That note? That wasn't just sung. It was owned." The applause surged again. Phones buzzed violently. Social feeds ignited. Somewhere, Jonah's name began climbing charts that had never known him. Jonah did not smile. He searched the crowd instinctively, as if expecting to see Eva sitting there, feet swinging, eyes wide. She wasn't. She was somewhere far quieter, and that mattered more. Elara finally found her voice. "This is a setup," she said hoarsely. "You think this means something?" Jonah turned toward her slowly. "It means I didn't lie," he replied. The words were simple. They did not need decoration. Security shifted uneasily. Event organizers whispered urgently into phones. The evening had slipped beyond control. Jonah stepped back from the microphone and placed it gently on the stand, as if returning something borrowed. He did not bow. He did not acknowledge the applause. He looked once more at the audience and spoke, not as a singer, but as a man. "I sang for my daughter," he said quietly. "That's all." Then he stepped out of the light. The applause followed him anyway. Backstage, chaos erupted, voices overlapping, decisions forming too late. But Jonah moved through it untouched, guided by something steadier than adrenaline. He knew what would come next. Calls, threats, offers wrapped in kindness and sharpened underneath. Truth had been heard, and truth never walked away without consequences. As Jonah disappeared into the corridor, the echo of his voice still ringing in the air, the world outside the theater began to turn toward the cost of refusing to take it back. The applause did not follow Jonah Reed into the hallway. It stopped at the edge of the light, obedient to walls it had never crossed before. Backstage, the air was different, thicker, sharper, crowded with whispers that moved faster than people. Headsets crackled. Shoes hurried across concrete. Someone dropped a clipboard and didn't bother to pick it up. Jonah walked until the noise dulled, then sat on a folding chair beside a stack of unused risers. His legs finally began to shake. He rested his elbows on his knees and stared at the floor, breathing through the aftershock of what he had done. He did not feel victorious. He felt exposed. A janitor with a voice had told the truth in front of the world. The world, Jonah knew, rarely responded with gratitude. "Hey," a familiar voice said gently. Jonah looked up. Pops Delaney stood there, mop still in hand, eyes steady. He didn't clap Jonah on the back. He didn't smile. He simply nodded, the way men did when they understood the weight of a moment. "You okay?" Pops asked. Jonah considered the question honestly. "I don't know," he replied. "That's fair," Pops said. Then he stepped aside as someone else approached. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Jonah's monthly rent. Her heels were quiet, practiced. A leather folder rested against her arm like a shield. "Mr. Reed," she said. "My name is Clara Whitmore. I represent Ms. Voss." Pops straightened instinctively, positioning himself half a step closer to Jonah. Jonah noticed and appreciated it. "I'm not interested," Jonah said before Clara could continue. She smiled politely, the kind of smile meant to disarm. "I'm not here to argue," Clara replied. "Only to resolve an unfortunate misunderstanding." Jonah exhaled slowly. "There's no misunderstanding," he said. "She can't sing the note." Clara's smile didn't change. "The music industry is complex," she said smoothly. "Support tracks, vocal layering, none of that is illegal. Tonight simply lacked context." "Context doesn't change pitch," Jonah said. Clara tilted her head, acknowledging the point without conceding it. "Let's talk practically," she said, opening the folder. "You have a daughter." Jonah's chest tightened. Clara slid a document toward him. "This is a non-disclosure agreement," she continued. "You'll state publicly that tonight was a misunderstanding, that you were mistaken. In return," she paused deliberately, "Ms. Voss will cover your daughter's surgery in full." The words landed harder than any applause had. Jonah stared at the paper. Figures were already printed neatly at the bottom. A number that matched the one burned into his mind. $52,440. Enough to save Eva. Clara leaned in slightly. "There's more," she said softly. "A scholarship, recording opportunities, a fresh start. You won't need to clean floors anymore." Jonah swallowed. Pops shifted beside him, jaw tightening, but he said nothing. "And if I don't sign?" Jonah asked. Clara closed the folder halfway. "Then this becomes adversarial," she replied. "Defamation suits, injunctions, media scrutiny, private details made public." She met Jonah's eyes. "Ms. Voss has resources, time, lawyers who bill by the minute." Jonah felt the familiar pressure behind his ribs, the one that came whenever he thought of hospital corridors and countdowns. He picked up the pen. For a moment, the world narrowed to ink and paper. Then his phone vibrated. Jonah froze. He looked at the screen. Eva. Incoming call. His hands trembled as he answered. "Daddy?" Eva's voice was small, breathy. "I saw you." Jonah turned away slightly. pressing the phone closer to his ear. "You did great," Eva continued. The nurses clapped. Jonah closed his eyes. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked. "I'm okay," she said. "Daddy, why was that lady mad at you?" Jonah searched for words that wouldn't teach fear. "Because sometimes," he said carefully, "people don't like it when you tell the truth." There was a pause. Then Eva said, very softly, "But you always tell me lying is bad." Jonah felt something inside him crack open. "That's right," he said. "Then, are you scared?" He hesitated. "Yes," he admitted. Eva considered this. "But you still did it," she said. Not a question. A conclusion. Jonah smiled despite the burn in his eyes. "Yes," he said. "I did." "That means you're brave," Eva declared with the quiet certainty only children possessed. The line went quiet. Eva had drifted to sleep. Jonah lowered the phone. Clara waited patiently. He looked at the document again, at the number, at the signature line that would erase what he had just given the world. "I can't sign this," Jonah said. Clara's smile faded. "You're refusing help for your daughter," she said carefully. "No," Jonah replied. "I'm refusing to lie." Clara's eyes hardened. "Then understand what you're choosing." Jonah stood. "I already do." Clara gathered her folder, her voice colder now. "By morning, stories will circulate," she said. "They won't be kind. And when this gets harder, remember you had a way out." She turned and walked away. Pops exhaled slowly. "You sure?" he asked. Jonah nodded. "I chose family over fame once," he said. "I won't teach my daughter that truth is something you trade when you're afraid." Outside, the night air was cold. Jonah stepped out onto the loading dock, phone buzzing relentlessly now. Messages, unknown numbers, notifications stacking faster than he could read. He didn't open them. He looked up at the city lights instead. Distant, indifferent, alive. The truth had been sung. Now it would be tested. And as Jonah Reed stood alone in the dark, he understood that the next battle would not be fought with a voice, but with endurance. Because when power loses the stage, it goes to court. The morning arrived without mercy. Jonah Reed woke to the sound of his phone vibrating like a trapped insect on the kitchen table. It was barely 6. He had slept 3 hours, maybe less. The apartment was still dark, the city outside quiet in the way it only ever was before truth caught up with it. He reached for the phone. Hundreds of notifications. Messages from numbers he didn't recognize. Missed calls stacked in columns. Alerts from news apps he had never installed. The first headline froze him in place. Janitor accuses pop icon. Experts question his motives. He scrolled. Sources claim disgruntled worker seeks attention. Did last night's scene go too far? Jonah's throat tightened. The next article showed a photo of his apartment building. Peeling paint, a broken security gate, trash bags piled near the curb. "This is where Jonah Reed lives," the caption read. "A man desperate to escape poverty lashes out at success." Jonah set the phone down slowly. So this was how it worked. By 9 a.m., the story had hardened. Ilara Voss's legal team filed a $10 million defamation lawsuit, not just against Jonah, but against the sound engineer, Mark Ellison, against the band member who nodded on stage, against anyone who had dared to say the words out loud. It wasn't meant to win. It was meant to exhaust. At the hospital, Eva slept through most of it. Machines hummed softly. Nurses spoke in practiced tones. Jonah sat beside her bed, phone face down in his pocket, refusing to let the chaos enter the room.
"Daddy,"
Eva murmured without opening her eyes.
"did you sing again?"
Jonah smiled.
"Yes,"
He whispered.
"I did."
By noon, the tone shifted. A video appeared online, grainy at first, then suddenly everywhere. A woman sat in a modest recording studio, gold records lining the wall behind her. Her face was calm, older than the pop icon she resembled, only faintly. "My name is Mara Lane," she said into the camera. "I'm a studio vocalist." Jonah's heart began to pound. "For 12 years," Mara continued, "I recorded high-register vocals for Ilara Voss, the crown notes, the ones she couldn't sing live." She held up contracts, emails, audio stems labeled in unmistakable handwriting. "I was paid per session and told never to speak. I signed an NDA because I needed the work. Last night, a janitor told the truth when I didn't have the courage to." The video spread faster than the smear ever had. Within an hour, 2 more singers came forward, then 3, each with receipts, each with a story eerily similar. By evening, the headlines changed. Studio singers confirm janitor's claims. Evidence emerges. Crown notes not sung by Ilara Voss. Jonah watched it unfold from a chair in the hospital hallway, coffee growing cold in his hands. He did not cheer. He did not feel vindicated. He felt tired. That was when his phone rang again, this time with a name he didn't recognize, but a number that didn't feel threatening. "Mr. Reed," a woman said when he answered. "My name is Nina Alvarez. I'm an attorney." Jonah closed his eyes. "I'm not signing anything," he said immediately. "I know," Nina replied calmly. "I don't work for her." That made him open his eyes. "I represent people who get sued to shut them up," she continued. "And I'd like to represent you. Pro bono." Jonah hesitated. "Why?" he asked. "Because what she filed is a strategic lawsuit," Nina said. "It's designed to drain you, not defeat you. And because what you said was true." She didn't soften the next part. "This won't be quick. She has money. She'll drag it out. But legally? She's exposed." Jonah looked down the hallway toward Eva's room. "If I do this," he asked quietly, "can I still take care of my daughter?" There was a pause. "Yes," Nina said, "but it won't be easy." Jonah nodded to himself. "It never is," he replied. The preliminary hearing took place 3 days later in a modest courtroom that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Reporters filled the back rows. Ilara arrived surrounded by attorneys, face composed, eyes hollowed by something new. Fear. Jonah sat beside Nina in the only clean shirt he owned. Pops Delaney sat behind him, hands folded, silent as ever. Ilara's lawyer argued aggressively, calling Jonah reckless, malicious, motivated by envy. Nina stood calmly. "We'd like to play the unedited footage," she said. The courtroom watched. They saw Ilara drag Jonah on stage. They heard the whispered words, fail quietly. They watched her miss the note. When the screen went dark, the judge looked directly at Ilara. "You're asking this court to silence people who say you cannot sing that note," she said evenly. "Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ilara's lawyer replied. The judge nodded once. "Then sing it." The room went still. Ilara froze. I'm not warmed up," she said. "You've performed on demand for 15 years," the judge replied. "This court will wait." Ilara opened her mouth. No sound came out. The judge struck the gavel. "Injunction denied," she said. "This court will not be used to punish truthful speech." Outside, cameras exploded. Headlines rewrote themselves in real time. That night, Jonah sat alone in Eva's hospital room, lights dimmed, the storm finally quieting. He watched her sleep, chest rising evenly for once. The truth had survived the first test, but Jonah knew better than to believe that meant it was over. Power never fell all at once. It cracked. And in those cracks, something else began to grow, something that looked less like revenge and more like change. As Jonah rested his forehead against the cool glass of the window, the city breathing beyond it, he understood one final thing. The world had heard him. Now it would decide what to do with the echo. And in the last chapter, the answer would not come from a stage or a courtroom, but from what remained after the noise was gone. The quiet returned the way it always did, slowly and without asking permission. 3 days after the ruling, the hospital room felt different. The machines still hummed, the lights still dimmed at night. But something unseen had shifted, like pressure easing after a long storm. Ava Reed slept with one hand curled near her chest, the other loosely holding Jonah's finger. Her breathing was steadier now, less hurried. The doctors spoke carefully, the way they always did, but their eyes carried something new. Hope. Jonah sat beside the bed and watched her sleep, afraid to move in case the moment shattered. He had learned that fear in 5 years of hospital nights. That stillness could be protective. His phone buzzed softly. A message, not a call. Funds confirmed. Surgery scheduled for Friday. Jonah closed his eyes. He did not cry. Not yet. Later that afternoon, he stepped outside into the small courtyard near the pediatric wing. The air smelled of wet leaves and disinfectant. Parents passed quietly, eyes hollowed by waiting. Jonah nodded to them, the way people who shared an unspoken language did. His phone buzzed again. Another message. Then another. Sponsors had withdrawn from Alara Voss's foundation. The charity was under audit. Ticket buyers were being refunded. The label had paused her contract, the industry's preferred word for endings that wanted to look temporary. Jonah read none of it closely. He had already learned what noise did. Instead, he opened a different message, one he had saved, but not answered yet. From Nina Alvarez. Jonah, if you're ready, I'd like to talk about next steps, not just defense. Impact. Impact. That word sat with him longer than it should have. That evening, Jonah returned to the theater. Not for a performance. For his shift. The custodial room smelled the same. Bleach, old wood, quiet work. Pops Delaney stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, humming something low and tuneless. You don't have to be here, Pops said without turning. Jonah smiled faintly. I know, he replied. He hung his jacket in the same dented locker and put on his gloves. The familiar weight settled him. They worked in silence for a while, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. After a few minutes, Pops spoke again. They asked if you wanted the stage, he said. Big event, big apology. Jonah paused, mop resting against the floor. And? He asked. I told them you were busy, Pops replied. Jonah nodded. Thank you. The next morning, Jonah sat across from Nina Alvarez at a small cafe near the hospital. Papers were spread between them, neat and orderly. We're not countersuing for spectacle, Nina said. We're doing this carefully. Consumer transparency, charity accountability, industry disclosure. Jonah listened. And you? Nina asked gently. What do you want? Jonah looked out the window. I want my daughter to grow up knowing her voice matters, he said, even if it shakes. Nina smiled. That's a good foundation, she said. Let's build it. They named it Open Voices, a nonprofit, artist-led, transparent to the decimal. Scholarships for singers from working-class families. Legal education on contracts. Mandatory disclosure for pre-recorded vocals at ticketed live events. No NDAs that erased names. No silence bought with fear. Change did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived with paperwork. Within 6 months, 3 states passed disclosure requirements for live performances. Platforms updated crediting standards. Studio vocalists, long invisible, appeared in liner notes where they had always belonged. And Jonah Reed? He did not rush back to the stage. When offers came, and they did, he turned most of them down. "I don't tour," he said simply. "I parent." He recorded 1 album, quietly, independently. Still, here. It wasn't flashy. It didn't chase charts. It sold because it was honest. The final track was short. Just Jonah's voice. No instrumentation. And Eva, laughing in the background. The night before Eva's surgery, Jonah sat beside her bed and held her hand.
Daddy, she whispered, will you sing?
Jonah leaned close. He sang softly, not Crown of Mercy, not any song that carried a history too heavy for the room. He sang something simple, something safe. Eva's eyes fluttered closed. The surgery lasted 8 hours. Jonah waited. When the doors finally opened, the doctor smiled. "It went well," she said. Jonah sank into a chair and cried then. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the way a man cried when a weight he had carried for years was finally set down. Months later, Jonah stood once more in the empty theater. No lights, no audience, just him and Pops, finishing a late shift. Pops leaned on his mop. "You ever miss it?" he asked. "The noise?" Jonah thought for a moment. "No," he said. "I miss the truth." Pops nodded. They turned off the lights together. Outside, the city breathed, imperfect, loud, alive. Jonah took Eva's hand as they walked toward the exit. She skipped once, careful but confident, her heart finally given room to grow. "Daddy," she said, looking up at him. "Are you famous now?" Jonah smiled. "No," he said. "I'm heard." Eva considered that. "That's better," she decided. And as they stepped into the night, no stage, no spotlight, no lies left to outrun, Jonah Reed understood what the story had always been about. Not a janitor who sang, not a diva who fell, but a man who refused to teach his child that silence was safer than truth, and in doing so, left the world a little more honest than he found it. And that was enough.